Thank you guys for joining us back. We do have with us Dr. Olivia Otsenine, who is our State Board of Education liaison. Dr. Otsenine, welcome once again to Stacey. We look forward to your updates.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Lady Locklear. First of all, let me say how much I'd love to be with you there in Raleigh, probably on the 7th floor in the meeting room. I had some other obligations that I had to attend to today, so I just simply couldn't make the drive to Raleigh, but wanted to make sure that I did fulfill my responsibility as the liaison to Stacey for the State Board of Education. Just to quickly give you an update, I just read, I think I saw a letter from Mrs. Yates. One of the things that she was interested in is an update on the American Indian. We haven't really given it a title. We've called it a director, a coordinator of education, Indian Education Services. We haven't quite landed on a title, but just to give you an update on that position, as I shared with you, probably the last time we met, the position did make it in the budget, the State Board of Education and DPI budget. I am sorry to say, though, it didn't make it through the General Assembly committees. It was one of those areas that came back as not, well, I don't want to dampen it and dampen your spirits and say it's over, because it isn't. It just didn't make it through the budget for the current year. I followed up with our legislative director for NCDPI, and he also works closely with the State Board of Education and represents our budgetary request as well, and talk with him at length about what we need to do to make sure that the next go round in the long session, that we do everything we can as a SACE, as well as the North Carolina Indian Commission, and anything that you can do politically, because it really does come down to this. It comes down to getting with your legislative delegations in your counties, letting them know the necessity of this position, and that we want to see it. We want to see it in the budget the next time, after the long session. The long session begins in January, and it goes all the way through well into several months beyond that. So that the long session is where all the hard work around the budget and new laws and so on and so forth take place. I made it clear in the public meeting of the State Board when it was announced to the State Board that it was an update on the entire budget. This is the outcomes of the budget process. And so when the position came forward as one of the positions that was not a piece in the budget that wasn't funded, I certainly was vocal in terms of letting everyone know how disappointed I was that my year serving on SACE, for at least two, in some capacity being affiliated with SACE in some way or other, that I was disappointed, and that we would welcome any advice, recommendations on how to get behind this item and make sure that we get it to the right place. But as I said just a minute ago, don't give up. I'm not giving up. It's just going to probably take some rolling up our sleeves and talking to the right people. I did talk with Mr. Greg Richardson a few days ago and made him aware that the item was not funded in the current budget, and he did indicate that he would share that with members of the commission and perhaps do something on the commission side of things to advocate for the position. So it's just going to take some time, and it's going to take a little bit of political maneuvering on our part. And I don't say that in a negative way. What I would just say to you is get in touch, because this is the way the world of politics works. It's get in touch with your legislators and say, this is a position that has been in the budget a recommendation coming out of SACE annually, and it is time that something positive happen with that item, that it get funded. I will pause now and just take any questions that you have about that item, because that is an important update. Questions or comments?
There are no questions or comments at this time. I would just like to thank you for your advocacy as it relates to this position, and just speaking up and being vocal about this position, because it is certainly needed. So thank you.
Absolutely, it certainly is needed. What I would recommend that we do as a SACE is perhaps at the next meeting, spend some time. I'm not saying you have to spend 2 hours, but I would say maybe 30-minute discussion on really laying out in clear terms what we would like to see in that position. I think the more we're on the same page as SACE members in terms of what would we like to see in this position. The position would be housed at NCDPI. I think that certainly will help all of us be on the same page when we're out in our communities and our counties talking to our legislators about that position. I've already spoken with one member of, well, he's not a member yet. He's certainly running for political office down in Robeson County. And I'm very hopeful that he wins the seat. And so I've already spoken with him, Mr. Jared Lowry, and about the position. And certainly we'll talk with others who are already seated in the General Assembly about the position. So it is going to take roll up our sleeves and use, because one of your roles and responsibilities as a member of SACE is advocacy in your communities for the cause of Indian students. So now's the time to do that. But I would say, Chair Lady Locklear, I would say maybe spend a few minutes next month talking about, or next meeting, I should say, talking about the specifics of that position. Just another update, the release of the EOC and EOG data, that was a major item on the state board meeting last month. Well, actually, it was just 2 weeks ago. And I just want to, I'm certainly not going to go into deep detail around the data. There is a very lengthy PowerPoint presentation that was presented to the State Board of Education. You can go to the State Board of Education meeting site and you can pull up, that PowerPoint is still available, and it would be, you would look for September 2, and you would go in the committee SLA, and you would see an item around the state accountability report. You can take a look at that PowerPoint at your leisure. Like I say, it's very lengthy because that annual report to the State Board of Education is one of the major pieces of information that comes to our way on an annual basis. Perhaps at a future meeting, Chair Lady Locklear, perhaps you could, of course, when you get ready, when SACE prepares to write your annual report, you will go into the data and pull some of the data as it relates to the American Indian student population, and those data will become part of your SACE report. I'll just hit a couple of highlights. The graduation rate for American Indian students for the 21-22 year was 85.3%. For all students, it is 86.2%. Compared to the 1920 data, American Indian graduation rate was 85.4. Again, this year, it is the most current year, it is 85.3. That may seem insignificant. Well, you'd have to look at raw numbers to determine, just how, what kind of change are we talking about there. The participation rate, the percent participation rate, that means participating in an EOG, EOC. That's a very important data point that the Department of Education in DC in Washington is interested in. So the participation rate for American Indian students, 21. Let me make sure I have this right. 21-22 was 85.3 compared to all students in North Carolina was 86.2. And let me make sure, am I on that? Yeah. And for, it's 85.3 compared to 86.2. There were, out of 2,600 schools, I find this data interesting, out of 2,608 schools in North Carolina, 1,984 schools met the participation rate, all participation target areas, and that represents about 76.1% of all schools. As far as some academic data, I'm just going to focus on the reading scores above the level of 4 and above. 4 and above, that is where we dream of where we want our American Indian students to be, 4 and above. So looking at American Indian data specifically, I'm looking at grade 3. Now keep in mind, these are percentages that I'm sharing with you. We had in grade 3, 15%, a little bit over 15% of American Indian students, and this is in reading. 3.8, 15.4% of American Indian students were at level 4 or higher, compared to Asian students, 50.4% and 37.8% for white. There are 3 or 4 other racial categories. I'm just hitting Asian and white. But if you go into that PowerPoint presentation, and you'll have to go through several frames to get to this particular one, you'll see the data which I'm sharing. For grade 4, again, reading, and these are the percentages of students 4 and above, level 4 and above, and that's very admirable. That's like making B pluses and A's. 21.1% for grade 4 compared to Asian, 60.1, compared to white, 48.6. Grade 5, American Indian, 14.8, compared to Asian, 56.6, compared to white, 43.1. Grade 6, this kind of dip for grade 6 reading, 12% at 4, level 4 and above, compared to 59.9 for Asian, compared to 34.6 for white. Grade 7, 17.2% AI, American Indian, compared to 60.5% Asian, compared to a little bit over 39% for white. 8th grade students, American Indian, 15.4, scoring 4 or above. Again, I like to say making high B's and A's is the way I like to talk about it, compared to 59.9 for Asian students, and close to 39 again for white. So that's just a smidgen of, there's a lot of data. I mean, the report, the PowerPoint is chock full of data. And again, I would encourage you at your leisure to go through that data. There's some interesting information on students, the passing the minimum passing rate on the ACT. Let me share that. The score, the minimum passing on ACT increased from 17 to 19. We had American Indians, percent of American Indians meeting that minimum, which is 19, is 22.8%, compared to all students, 47, that means all demographic groups, 41.7, compared to white students, 55.9, compared to Asian students, 70.4. And again, American Indian taking the ACT and meeting the minimum score of 19 is 22.8. You know, that's enough data right there because our Indian students, I'm very proud of the progress they make. But those data that I just shared with you could be data that you could use in your talking points with your legislative delegations in your communities. I'm certainly going to be talking it up. 22.8% meeting the minimum on the ACT, and that's one of the exams, entrance exams for college, post-secondary education. The 19 is the 19 point minimum is 19, 22.8. You want to round it off and say 23. American Indians met the minimum compared to all students, all demographics, 41.7, compared to white students, 55.9, compared to Asian students, 70.4. That is the evidence right there that we need to take forward and say, this is the reason we want this position. Do you have any questions?
There are no questions at this time.
It was my pleasure. Next time you meet, I plan to be in person. And again, on behalf of the State Board of Education, I can't say thank you enough for all that you do to help the State Board of Education and to advocate on behalf of all American Indian students in the state, as well as their families, as well as their communities. Thank you for all you do. And that will conclude my presentation. Chair Lady Locklear.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today and the value that you bring to Stacey. Oh, we have one question, Dr. Oxendine. I'm sorry.
Sure, I'm still here.
I wasn't sure if you were going to be discussing this, Dr. Oxendine, but previously Dr. Locklear mentioned that we as Stacey hope to have an Indian education program in every district here in the state. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but Orange County and Durham County do not, and I think Sampson is in the process. You being a part of DPI, is there a way that you can advocate for us to the superintendent of the state of North Carolina of the importance of having Indian education program in every district at the school?
I certainly will. Absolutely, I will advocate for that. I believe, let me ask this question. Are you talking about the grant from Indian Education, is it the Title VI grant? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So is the requirement that you have at least 10 American Indian students in the school district, is that still in the law?
Yes.
Well, let me tell you something. If school districts have met that minimum, then that is something we've got to push for. If school districts are meeting the minimum,
superintendent had no idea even what that program was through Title VI. They had no idea that there was federal funding available, and that's obviously something that needs to come from the state to every school district in the state, that we've got it available.
Absolutely. And I would suggest that, I don't know how we could do this other than to do it. It needs to be maybe a real clear focus on Indian Education Title VI in the next SACE report. A letter to Superintendent Truitt, a letter to copy to Chair Eric Davis of the State Board of Education, and I certainly will echo whatever is in that letter.
So you would think we would need to wait until all the way next year to put it in the letter?
I think you need to do a letter as soon as possible.
Okay.
No, but what I'm saying in your next report, certainly highlight that. I mean, that could be your standing recommendation.
Dr. Locklear did.
But what I'm saying is start your letter writing ASAP.
Dr. Locklear does have it in this current report, though, that's one of focuses. So I'm not sure they're not getting it or they're not understanding it. And I'm thinking you as someone who works for DPI and being Native yourself, it could be helpful if you advocate directly.
Oh, well, you don't have to worry about that. Yes, I will certainly be advocating for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time today, Dr. Oxenine.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
And the same to each of you.
At this time, we will hear updates from Dr. Susan Silver, who is the Diagnostic Services Lead here. She is going to show us the data dashboard for our 2021-2022 data.
All right, good afternoon again, everyone. I'm going to be very brief because Dr. Oxenine went over a lot of the data already. I do want to point out for our new members, in your folder, there is the last year's report. This is a report that this council produces annually. So as you're thinking about data, Dr. Oxenine mentioned that it's certainly a key component of this. And you look at the data and then you make your recommendations going forward. So that process will begin on our end of working with our accountability division pretty swiftly in the next couple of weeks. And then at our next meeting, it will be up to you all to decide on a theme and what you want your recommendations to be to come out of that. So just putting that at your forefront, and it's there for you to read. It's also on the website. And kind of in correlation to what Ms. Frazard was saying, this report goes out to all superintendents in the state with a letter from whoever our current acting deputy is. In this case, it will be Deputy Superintendent Taylor. And usually we send it when a report comes out. We made a decision this year to hold it and blast it in November. So our plan is to blast it in November along with a update reminder about that it's Indian Heritage Month. So it does go to all superintendents. The challenge is always, how do you get superintendents to read things, right? And that's something over which we have no control, which is where that advocacy at the local level becomes so important. But moving forward, there's a link in the agenda, and if you have your computers open, I encourage you to go to it, because the best way to explore this data is just to get your hands in it. As Dr. Oxendine shared, the State Board of Education approved this data at their September meeting, so just a few weeks ago. Dr. Taylor also alluded to, as we knew would be the case, an increase in our number of low-performing schools and districts, which is in no small part because of the pandemic. And while the pandemic is certainly a factor, it is what it is. Our children had some issues with academic performance before, and we can't blame that all on pandemic. So when you go to the data dashboard, and I'm just going to show you how to navigate to it, and then again, as you have time on your own, you can certainly explore that. So a couple things to note, and Dr. Connie alluded to this. So when we look at numbers, these numbers are based on self-reporting, meaning that it's what goes into PowerSchool and that generates the numbers. So if you have a student who, for example, Dr. Connie had shared the example of they could be part of Title VI but be functioning in that Title VI under their grandparent. So they may not be in PowerSchool as American Indians. So it's not necessarily that all your Title VI kids are showing up in here. So it's not always a direct correlation, and that's just something we have no control over because, again, it's a self-reporting structure. So in Title VI Indian education, you have to have verification. If a student shows up at XYZ district and says, hey, I'm an American Indian, schools don't have a right, and I'm not saying they should, to refute that and be like, well, prove that. So these numbers, in terms of demographic, are mostly correct. I don't want to send any message that they're not. I'm just saying there are those variances in there, okay? So when you hear something about the dashboard, and we're just going to look at what they call the composite score. So that's overall the composite of all the tests that were taken, those scores. So the first thing you'll get is all students, and you can see numbers here, and you'll see the years here, and it starts with 2017, then goes to 2019, and then you'll see a gap. Well, that gap is obviously pandemic year. We did not test that year, so there's no data there. So in terms of typically we do a 3-year trend. So obviously that disrupted the 3-year trend, right? So then it picked up with 2021 data. That was when we tested last year. At that time, the state board decided they would not make any designations around performance. They would still test, but due to the pandemic, wouldn't identify letter grades and wouldn't make designations of low-performing districts or schools. This year, those designations are back. So that's where you heard Dr. Taylor reference the jump in the number of low-performing districts, and then that affects what types of services they get. So these are the numbers for all students. And if you want to specifically see American Indian students, you would just click on that drop down and pick those. and then it will show you specifically scores for American Indian students. And you can go down, and on the left-hand side, you'll see the list of all the tests if you wanted to look at a specific grade level, if you want to look at reading, math, biology, what have you, and you could see the performance for American Indian students. So here it is here. There is an increase in the composite from last year to this year. It's not much, but it didn't decrease. So that's just a look at the dashboard. Again, I'm not going to go through the exact numbers. We will send that PowerPoint that went to the state board. We will send that out to you all via email, the one that Dr. Oxendine was referencing. And you have the link to this data dashboard so that you can explore it on your own as you're thinking about how are our children performing and what recommendations do we as a council, what do we want to advocate for those children, and what can be our talking points when we come up with an advocacy package that we can roll out with legislators and roll out to our communities to give them talking points around that. So I'm not going to go through the specific data points because honestly I haven't studied them that closely yet, but I wanted to show you how you could access it on your own if you so choose. I'll take any questions at this time.
Alright, so at this time we will go into our Summit work session, which will not be live streamed. We have some tables back at the back, and so we can kind of go back there and unfold our planning back there in a more intimate setting.
And if I could know one more thing, in your agenda, there are links to the agendas from the previous summits, just so you can get an idea